Hi everyone, welcome to part 8 and the final part of videos for the first week of 3D modeling. I know it's been a pretty intense course so far with lots to do this week, but we're going to explain one last part of the video to help set up rendering so that you guys can render out nice images of your 3D models. So the first thing I'd like to do is explain a little bit about the material editor. The material editor is where we start loading in images inside 3D Studio Max and can assign different color polygons to a model we have, even if it's just a simple box shape or a cylinder, anything like that. We can start loading in materials. So I'd like you to create a simple box shape, and we're going to give it 2 length, 2 width, 2 height in the segments. And I'm going to right click on it and convert it to editable poly. So as you can see, the object we created, and I'm going to call this object, let's say super box, just to get used to naming conventions. And as you can see, it's already assigned a color to it, right? That's a default color in 3D Studio Max that it's assigned. But we want to change that color type. What I do is I push M on my keyboard. There's a shortcut key, very important. M on the keyboard opens the material editor. Now, the material editor is a whole new section of 3D Studio Max. So I don't mind if you have to go through this video over and over and over again. But I'm going to try and lay it out pretty simple for you. So the material editor has 3 parts. We have the hotbar and toolbar up here. We have the material and map browser with a whole bunch of different maps below that. We have our generic view and the parameters. So what you want to do inside 3D Studio Max, and for now we're going to play around with what's called standard materials, is we're going to create our first standard materials. We go to Scanline and we look and we see a standard material right here. You can left click on it once and it does nothing. Double click on it and it creates a standard material for us. If we double click on the little orb, it'll expand that orb so we can see exactly what it looks like. So if I look at it, it's a standard material and it's gray. Now I can't really do much with this right now, but if you double click on the title, material number 25 standard or whatever name it's given to you, it opens up in the parameter editor here. You're able to change the name of the material up top here. You can change the basic shader type here and change how it shows inside 3D Studio Max. If you want to show it as a wireframe, you just click wire and it reflects automatically here. If you want it two-sided, if you want a face map or fast head, you'll notice that in fast head mode or faced head, it's actually all flat-sided. It actually refuses to show any smoothness on your model, which is fine. It's usually fine in this standard mode. Standard creation works perfectly fine. Now, the 2 things we're going to have to change about our standard material here is the diffuse, the first one, where we can actually change the color assigned. Just like this color is automatically assigned to our model here, the diffuse changes the color that's shown on this orb here, this preview sphere. So if I click diffuse, I can actually change using this color editor. We can change what that looks like. And you can see as I automatically go through here, it automatically changes the color type here. So I'm going to find a nice green like this. Perfect. So I have this green material now, and I want to assign it to my model. I can go in my 3D scene while the material editor is active. If you have dual monitor, this is a good chance for you to throw the material editor to the second screen. And you can left click on your model and then right click on your material. If you right click on your material, all the options for the material editor pop up, including assign material to selection, change material map type, or you can rename it, etc., etc. It's all right there for you. So what I'd like you to do first is assign this material to your selection. You'll notice our material inside 3D Studio Max turns green. Now, you can also do this in further detail. So if I create another standard material by double clicking, I double click the orb sphere to make it bigger. I'm going to change the diffuse on this one to, let's say, a type A blue, like that. And I want to assign this material to the selection. Now what you're going to notice is that it overrides the entire shape, right? Now we're just playing around with just standard colors, green and blue, and then assign material. It's always going to take up the whole object. However, if we have edit poly open, or editable poly, and we select a polygon and then right click on this material and assign material to selection, it only assigns this material color to whatever polygons you have selected. So you can see, even though this is all green here, and this material number 25, this material number 26 only takes up this much space. So if we change any of the parameters of materials, it's only going to change that polygon that I have there. So that's an easy way to change the colors of the materials to assign to your model. You just create some standard materials and you can assign it to your model just like that. And that's usually no problem. And that's just by changing the diffuse. Right away, I want you to change the names of these to match what you're working on. So if your color green is supposed to be the color of lizard skin, just type something like lizard skin. And if this is supposed to be the belly of the lizard, then lizard belly, that type of thing. And then I'll assign that like that. This is a good way for you to keep track of your materials, because eventually, you may have 20 or 30 materials in just one scene, and this is a good way to sort of keep track of this. Now, what you need to also learn how to do is to not only just create materials, standard materials. Standard materials are the most common. You use them for pretty much everything because inside Unity, Unreal, or any game engine, or most movie engines, they actually will either specify what material type they need if they need something else. But in game engines, it's standard material until they're imported into the engine because you'll be told in the engine, a programmer or somebody else will give it a new shader type. So you don't need to worry about that too much inside 3D Studio Max. But if we want to change the self-illumination, we can change that. And that means how much the color is illuminating itself. It doesn't need any lights to give it light or to give it shadows. It will actually do that itself. We can change that number from 0 to 100. We can give it 50. And you'll notice, even in the preview window, at 50, the dark shadows are less there, and the color is appearing very flat. If we put it at 100, the color is completely flat. So that's a good way to do like an anime-style cartoon shading with no shading available. Just basic flat colors if you're trying to go for that type of look. Sometimes I like to set it at like about 20. It kind of hides a little bit of imperfections in your model, and the shadows aren't as dark, so it's not as contrast. It gives it a nice soft look. Final Fantasy is a good example of a game series that does this all the time. They use a lot of self-illumination, about half. So creating standard materials, assigning them simply by right-clicking on them and clicking Assign Material to Selection. Select polygons and right-click Assign Material to Selection if you want specific polygons selected. All really important tips. Now I'm going to show you quickly how to import an image inside 3D Studio Max to use as an image plane. That would be really important when it comes to 3D modeling more complicated objects. So I want you to find an image online of what's called an orthographic. I'm going to look up an orthographic right now. So if you look up an orthographic, let's say character, chances are you get something that looks like this. In the game industry, this is kind of the standard for what you want to work in. You want to work with a front and left view normally. Having a back view and an angled view definitely helps out. But if you have a front and left or right view, chances are you'll be able to work just fine 3D modeling because this creates something that we want to bring inside 3D Studio Max and model on top of. So I'm going to save this image to my desktop right there. And I want to bring this inside 3D Studio Max. So we're going to set up what's called a first image plane. I'm going to go to my front view since I know that I'll have to work in a front view on one part of the character. And I'm going to create a plane. Create a plane of, excuse me, any size. Any size plane is good. Now, I'm going to go to Standard Material, and I'm going to double-click on it to create a standard material. Double-click on the title to open up the parameters. I'm going to call this one Reference. I keep all the settings the same. Everything is good the way it is, except for Diffuse. Now, I can change the color of this Diffuse, and then assign it to my model. Assign Material to Selection right there. Perfect. But I need to add an image to this. I can click on this small box beside Diffuse. If you hover above it, it should say None. This is the material type, or the map. So we have a material map browser when we click on it, and it's going to ask you, okay, what material map do you want to use? And we don't want to use any of these. These are all generated inside 3D Studio Max, and they're great, but they're not the image we're looking for, of course. So, but the first one says bitmap. Bitmap is your way of telling 3D Studio Max, I want to load my own image. If we click on bitmap, double click on it, it'll send us to a folder on your computer anywhere with images that you can load up. Now try and find the image that your orthographic that you downloaded. On my desktop, I should have an orthographic and it should be right here, the TF2 engineer. And I load this up, and then if I double click on the actual little image square that pops up, I can see, okay, that's definitely the Team Fortress 2 engineer right there, and it's attached to my diffuse color using a line. Now these little lines here, this is what's called the node editor method of working. I can actually take away this line by breaking it off from there, and I can assign it to any section I want. Diffuse color is the main color of your object. So we want to always usually assign something to the diffuse. So now that it's assigned to the diffuse, we notice a problem. This is already assigned to my 3D model. I assigned this material to selection, but it's still showing up as the green color. If I look here, it's still showing up as the bluish green, and the material map that we have here is not showing on our model. It's like, why? Why is that happening? Well, that's because we need to show shaded material in viewport. So if I go back to my drawing, the reason why I created a plane at any size was because I need to change the image size. If you look down at the very bottom left of 3D Studio Max, you can see there's a statistics location, and it says the size of your image. So whatever size your image is, mine's 900 by 485, I want you to type that into 3D Studio Max. So I'm going to go into my parameters of my plane, and I'm going to type in 900 by 485. 900 by 485. Now make sure you type it in the right sections, your length and width sections. And then, once I have my plane at the right size, I can then scale it inside 3D Studio Max to however I feel I want to see it. Right beside my grid. Yep, sure, that looks perfect to me. I'm going to line this up right to my basic grid points right there, like this. And now that I have my plane, I'm going to right click on my plane, go to Object Properties, and I'm going to turn it Show Frozen in Gray off. Because we're going to freeze this later because we don't want to touch our image plane. So I'm going to turn Show Frozen in Gray off and click OK. But our map is still not showing on top of our plane. Here's what you have to do to make that work. On our reference material, we right-clicked already and we clicked Assign Material to Selection. However, there's another selection we need to do when we right-click here. We need to click Show Shaded Material in Viewport. This will show the map inside the viewport. I click on that. Look at that. We have our Team Fortress 2 Engineer reference loaded up inside 3D Studio Max. Just like that. And now if I were to freeze this, because I turned Show Frozen in Gray off, we actually have a reference that's built in right here that we cannot touch or alter, but we can work on top of in my front view. I'm going to turn the grid off there. And now if I start modeling, I can model based upon what I'm looking at here. I can build up my character size. I can extrude and move these body parts correctly. Don't forget that Alt-X on the keyboard, when you have a model selected, will make it transparent. So you see if I were going to model the hand or the arm, I can actually see through it into my orthographic, which is perfect because this is how you would start modeling an actual object and keep the proportions correct. Now, we have the front view correct. Now I see that there's a side view that I should be working with as well. Because if I'm going to model from the front and side view to make sure everything looks accurate, I want two of these references in my scene. I'm going to right click and click Unfreeze All so I'm able to access this again. And I'm going to actually rotate this with holding the Shift key to create a copy, and I'm going to rotate, and I'm going to make it a side view. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to grab this magnet tool here called the Angle Snap Toggle, which I showed you in a video before. And I'm going to make sure it's on. That means it's going to rotate by 5 degrees every time I move it. So I grab my plane, I hold Shift, and I begin rotating. And I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees perfectly. I'm going to create a copy of this. And it's called Plane 002. What I'd like you to do now with both planes in the scene, kind of line them up so they're touching right at the edge right there, like that. And I want to call this Reference Front. I'm going to call this one Reference Side. And then I'm going to freeze both of these. I'm going to highlight both. I'm going to right click and click Freeze Selection. And now I have two references set up, one in the front one on the side. And if you get this error like I'm getting on the left-hand side view, that means we need the right camera. Just click right camera. There you go. That looks better. G to turn the grid off. F4 to turn edge faces off. And now we have an orthographic view set up so that if we start modeling, let's say the foot here, now not only does it look like an appropriate position on my front part of my body, I can actually move it here on this side of the body and begin to position it. What you should learn to do right now while building this, we have a nice reference that we set up, and hopefully you have a reference of a character you like, is start building a character out of simple shapes, mainly out of boxes. Normally how I like to practice is I create boxes, like so. And they basically just cover the shape of the character in as correctly as possible. So now you can see my foot is starting here, and I can keep building up. I'm going to copy this polygon here. That. Rotate it a bit in this view. I'm going to turn off my angle snap rotation. Scale it a bit. And then you can always copy this over to the other side of the model. Remember that if you model one leg, you can always mirror it to the other leg. If you model one arm, you can mirror the arm as well. It saves you a lot of time doing that. So what I'd like to do normally first is create a box style version of my character, like as many boxes as possible, because I'm learning how to break down a character into simple shapes. When we get started on full character modeling, we're definitely going to take a look at more extrusion methods and getting crazy with the detail. But for right now, if you want to get started with early practice, I would definitely suggest making out of boxes. And in fact, if you want to take it a step further, don't just make it out of several different boxes all the time. Why not just try one single box and using the extrude method to get all the detail you need? And to do that, we just create a box like this. Very simple box, and I mean as simple as possible. One polygon by one one segment, one segment, one segment. Add the edit poly modifier or turn it into an editable poly. Convert to editable poly. And I just start modeling this way. So I'm going to add an inset here. Extrude. And I'm going to adjust the vertexes. And this is called the box modeling method. Technically, you're modeling a very accurate way of doing this. I'm just asking that you just take some time. Don't go too crazy. But just have fun with it and start creating a base shape for a character you like. Now, that can be a robot, that can be a character, that can be an item or a weapon. But as you can see here, just by playing around, this is with creating several different boxes. And this one is actually just one single object that I'm using. Extruding from. Click on the extrude tool again. And it's definitely closer to looking like the actual model, and this is the actual box method. So try both. Why not try making one out of several boxes, and try one using the extrusion technique. Try modeling a leg, an arm, a hand, different items. That will become really handy. So we learned about the material editor slightly, only enough to bring an image for an image plane, which is great. We'll be expanding upon the material editor a lot. We managed to make a couple of small models here. So the last step I'd like to take you to is what's called rendering. So we're going to go to our rendering menu at the very top toolbar. You'll see the rendering box. Now there's two things. There's Shift Q that allows you to render, which we can click right away. I can click Shift Q and we can see a render of our models. And you can move this camera around and click Shift Q, or you can go in any of the other views, hover your mouse and click in front view, and you'll render from the front view. You'll render from the side. You'll render from the top. And don't forget, one thing you're going to notice as I was going through there is that these references back here were being rendered. Remember earlier on I taught you about the object properties menu? We learned how to take something from show frozen in gray on and off and how to make it see-through. But we can also make it non-renderable. So if you never want to render the image planes in the background, just take off what's called renderable. And I'm going to go to this one as well and turn off renderable. And I'm going to freeze them again. And what you're going to notice is when I push Shift Q next, it's just the legs, just my model, nothing else, which is great. And then, so that's Shift Q is just a quick render mode, quick render. But we need to change the render setup. So which is F10 on the keyboard, or we can just click on rendering, render setup if you ever forget. And we can change the size of the window. We're not going to play around with too much other than just the size right now, but we can change the output size, which is right here. Okay. If you click on output size, you're able to change the different cameras that it has by default. Whole bunch of different 35 millimeter, 70 millimeter camera types of default. But normally what I like to do first is just set it up to regular HDTV setup. Because this will give you the standard parameters for 1920 by 1080, 1280 by 720. And if we click on 1920 by 1080, we get the nice widescreen render look of our 3D model. Now, once you have a render that you like this, we can just click on the Save Image button at the very top left. There's a few different options. We have copy image, we have clone rendered frame window to another render frame window. We can even print directly from here. We can turn off colors. We can change the views and re-render, and we can change the render presets. However, we can just click on Save Image right there, and we can save it to our desktop so that we can share or bring it into Photoshop or whatnot. If I click Save Image, and I click on my desktop, and then I type in my file name, I'll call this foot render, that. I get to choose a file type to save as. So I see save as type, all formats. I can choose PNG, JPEG. I normally recommend PNG because then in Photoshop, the black in this render will become transparent. And you can make your own background in Photoshop of whatever color you like if you know a little bit of Photoshop. So I have foot render. It's saved as a PNG, and I click save. 3D Studio Max, when you render as a PNG, or even sometimes as JPEG in different options, will normally ask you a type of quality setting. Is there an alpha channel? Yes, the black will be considered an alpha channel. How many colors do you want? Do you want this 48-bit? Perfect. Okay. And now my render should be saved to my desktop. And you can see there's no black background. It's completely alpha transparent. And we have the render of our 2 feet there. So don't be afraid to try and render some models as well. Change the render type, the render settings here in the rendering menu, render setup. You can change the output size very simply by changing it to HDTV or making a custom size that you want. Being able to change it using these buttons here to whatever aspect you want. In custom, you're able to modify it a little bit more. You can change the aperture width, you can change the image aspect, the pixel aspect, and then change the size to what you see fit. But normally HDTV video for 1920 by 1080, 1280 by 720, those make some really good renders. And Shift Q at any point in time will render your scene. If you're playing around and you're like, I want to see what this looks like really quick, hold Shift, push Q. Oh, hit the wrong button. I hit the wrong button, my apologies. Hold Shift, push Q, and there you go. You'll have your quick renders that pop out that we can see the detail on. So, that was a lot to learn in one video. My apologies there. We learned about the material editor, creating a standard material, assigning colors to your meshes, creating image plane setups, and starting modeling the foot using a box technique where we just create boxes and boxes and boxes, just like your box characters, except this time we're following a reference of a character. So pick some character you like, try and put boxes together to form that character. If you can tell it's that character just in the regular box form, then that's great. That means you have an understanding of turning a 2D image into a 3D object, and you understand the types of length, width, and height dimensions of a character. You can also try the box modeling technique, which is starting from a single box and extruding from it to create the entire shape of a character. Next week, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on inorganic objects. We're going to focus on creating items such as a handgun, a sword, a shield, in a lot more detail, and that includes unwrapping, and we're going to start talking about texturing as well. So the first week is just your basic introduction to 3D Studio Max, the overall layout, the modifiers, the edit polys, adding more modifiers, the material editor, some modeling techniques, and that's a lot to learn in a single week. The reason why we give you the assignments, such as the box character, the sword and shield, and if you want to expand on that by making a box character using these orthographics, is because learning these techniques is going to become very key, especially when it comes to finalizing full 3D models that we're going to use for rendering. So practice a lot this week using these modeling tutorials. They'll come in really handy, and the more you practice now, the better your objects are going to look in the future, and the more detail you can add to them. Because next week when we start inorganic models, not only are we going to be working on simple items, we're probably going to be working on small scenes that we need to create together as well. So that's going to become really important. Well, thank you very much for everyone for this week. All the videos are now going to be uploaded for you. And if you have any questions about them, feel free to ask anytime. If you need a small tutorial as well, just let me know. I will review your work. That's what the 3 hours are for that you have, for me to review your work and go through them and give you some hints and tips and advice to keep your modeling going straight. But just do your best. These tutorials and lessons are made for you. And if you need anything from me, just shoot me an email. Thank you very much, and look forward to starting next week.